My name is Michael Rubino. I'm on a personal mission to make sure you don't get sick inside your own home.
I knew there was something wrong. I'm just so relieved there's something that you can do about it.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Never Been Sicker. I am your host, Michael Rubino, and today's very special guest is Brendan. Brendan, how are you? Thank you for taking so much time out of your busy day to be here with us. It means a lot.
Oh, absolutely, brother. It's good to have a part two conversation. Fun that we got to talk twice in 1 week. My podcast, your podcast, and a lot of good education for our audiences.
Exactly. You know, you can never talk too much about the importance of health and wellness and indoor air quality and all the things. So thank you so much for being here. Let's dive right in. We have never been sicker than we are today, right? Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, especially in America, speaking as an American, the American collective has never been more compromised, shall we say.
Yes. And so, you know, I get to have exciting guests like yourself on this all the time. And I always get it to ask the perspective. Why is that, right? We have all this advancements in medicine, all this advancements in technology. What's your view on why we've never been sicker?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I was on a podcast last night. We were kind of tapping in some of that. It was supposed to be like a gut-brain axis episode, and it really just turned into like chronic disease 101, right? And I think especially now is a really interesting point in time, because I think we'll look back in like 10, 20, 30 years and be like, how did we ever let it get that bad, right? The ultra processed food, the sedentary lifestyle, the obesity, metabolic, chronic disease crisis, how did it ever really get that bad? Because it's taken, 2-3 decades, especially, you know, I'm about to turn 33 this year. And when I look at some of the statistics, it really was like 1990, 1992, that the obesity crisis really started flaring up. But the fact that it had to hit this sort of critical mass, with 88% of Americans being metabolically ill, about 70% overweight or obese, about half the population being diabetic or pre-diabetic, seeing the rise in neurodevelopmental disorders and chronic disease in children. So, you know, it's just absolutely staggering. But to simplify the whole equation, what is it really going on? I would say first and foremost, it's the lifestyle-induced illness. It's the processed food, it's the sedentary lifestyle. And then, you know, the other layers of, I think we live in a very sociologically kind of psychotic, stressful, high-speed, instant gratification, victim mentality is its own epidemic in some pockets. And then also, I think the toxic burden, which I'm sure we're going to get into a lot today, the glyphosate, the EMFs, the toxins, the metals, the mycotoxins, all of that. So I would say the environment, or the lifestyle piece, you know, is the biggest thing. I was saying on the podcast last night that if I could only pick like one or two tools to combat the metabolic and mental health crisis, I'd hands down pick exercise number one, nutrition number two. But certainly the increasingly toxic environment is definitely a major contributor, and the research is starting to illuminate that more and more.
Totally. I mean, you know, it's the nice thing about it is all the things that you mentioned, there's something you can do about it, right? And I think that's really important. And so you mentioned this whole victim mentality. If you adopt this victim mentality, right, you're probably not going to take the massive action that's required to address those points, right? And so I think it's a really important endeavor. It's like you have to start to take these steps. You know, obviously, sometimes we all get, you know, the best of us, we all get put into situations where we're just running into a wall, right? Where nothing seems to be going our way, right? I mean, I know I've been in that situation before where I felt like, you know, nothing's going my way as a person, right? And I've had to deal with struggles. We all go through trials and tribulations. Deepak Chopra once said, you know, everybody has trauma, right? Like everybody has some level of childhood trauma. You know, show me a human and I'll show you childhood trauma. You know, in that moment, it's really easy to adopt this victim mentality because, you know, life can be hard sometimes, let's face it, right? But that doesn't really help us, you know, conquer these barriers, right? And so, you know, I love your viewpoint on the victim mentality and how do we get out of that?
Yeah, you know, I have a local friend actually years ago. He would always say, victim or victor, it's your choice, right? And so my favorite social media post I have ever put out, which I just recycled the other day because it felt time to put it back out there. And I talk about how we all have our traumas. We're not all traumatized, or even in that same carousel, we all get exposed to mold. We don't all develop mold illness, right? And that nuance is key. And certainly this is where some of these ancient philosophies like Stoicism of like, we can't control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we respond. And certainly I never want to be triggering or polarizing or accusational and make people feel like I'm accusing them of victim mentality. But I do think this is the inner work we all have to do of really taking a look at our inner landscape and our psyche. And we have to choose, do we want to succumb to that victim mentality and stay idle and stay stuck and blame our sorrows on other external things? Or do we want to take that radical ownership of, well, what can I do to improve my circumstances? And that's really the hero's journey. That is the eudaimonic self-actualization that leads to a much more fulfilling earth walk and life experience.
Now, I noticed you mentioned that, this is definitely one of the top things out there that people really have to overcome. It's that mentality. How much of a role does that play in health and wellness, in your opinion?
Honestly, the deeper I get into my life, I think it's the number one thing. And it's interesting, just even looking at my life path and everything, fitness became a sort of catalyst. If you can learn how to push yourself hard in the gym, or even making yourself really suffer through intense workouts and grinding and all of that, the level of resilience that you can develop, both mentally, spiritually, and of course, physiologically as well. So especially as we get into the subject of mold illness, so much of it becomes this story of, okay, yes, how do we decrease the toxic burden and exposure? But almost more importantly, how do we build up our metabolic, immunological, and psychological resilience to illness or mold illness or anything else? And especially with the mold illness landscape, it can be a really hard thing to prove a causal relationship. It's nearly impossible to really prove that mold really is what's driving the symptoms. And not that we're trying to gaslight anybody or invalidate their experience, but we have to be careful about not convincing somebody they have mold illness if they don't, but also not trying to take somebody that may very well have mold illness and trying to convince them that they don't have it either. So sure, that nuance is the tricky thing. But the point being, certainly with like the placebo nocebo effect, which I speak to so often, because when you think about this, we all know the placebo effect. Placebo basically means you're taking an empty capsule, but you're getting health benefits from an empty capsule because you believe that it's helping you. You believe it's having some sort of therapeutic effect. And it's such a powerful, well-documented scientific phenomenon that it's literally the gold standard of how we conduct legitimate clinical research, by controlling for the placebo effect. And yet at the same time, we're never talking about the nocebo effect, which is like the shadow twin of placebo. So nocebo essentially means I could be taking an empty capsule, but if I think it's hurting me, I'm more likely to experience a negative symptom or health outcome. And essentially, you're manifesting your own symptoms, you're manifesting your own illness through this kind of psychosomatic axis. So essentially, this is illuminating the power of the mind and the power of mindset. And, do you have a very defeatist, like, I'm never going to get better, I can't tolerate any supplements, everything's making me sicker, versus, no, I'm resilient, I can heal, I will heal, and I'm willing to do what it takes to get better. So even just harnessing the power of mindset, I think, is probably the number one dictator of any kind of healing journey or clinical outcome.
All right. So, and I totally agree with you, right? I think mindset's really, really important, really, really powerful. I think the human mind can do a lot more than we think. Shifting gears, it sounds like you said exercise. What probably is that your second item here?
Yeah. I mean, I guess if I had to rank it, I definitely think the mindset, and then exercise, which can be a great catalyst for building your mindset in a lot of ways. Very good character building exercise.
Okay, so if exercise is really the second most important in your book, right? Let's talk about that. Please dive into that. I mean, we were talking like, do I just need to walk? Do I just need to do like the 10,000 step a day rule? Do I need to lift weights? How high of an intensity? I mean, what's the ideal scenario here?
Yeah, what's cool about it is it's so bizarre that, it's like I really started my career as a personal trainer and nutrition coach. And then even when I came into the functional medicine space for a while, I was a little bit worried maybe people won't respect me or think I'm credible because my background is fitness and nutrition, not conventional medicine or something like that. I'm not a medical doctor. But then here we are in 2025, and like all the biggest names in functional medicine, they're all just like, yeah, exercise, build muscle. It's going to, fix everything and cure everything. the thing is, the scientific literature has really caught up with what should be common sense and intuition that, well, yes, exercise, it's not just about building muscle and looking good aesthetically. It's about having good metabolic, neurological function, and therefore also mental and psychological health for years to come. And so certainly, as any fitness professional or any fitness person should be able to really allude to, we have to meet the person where they're at, right? Like it's going to be a totally different scenario if they're a well-conditioned athlete versus somebody that has really never exercised or trained regularly in their life, right? So it's all about, well, let's get you moving. What is a type of movement that you enjoy and a regimen that you enjoy? Because if you don't really enjoy it, and you might have to learn how to enjoy it a little bit, there is that essence of it. But at the same time, if they really hate it, they're not going to keep doing it, right? And when it comes to fitness, I mean, this is a game, a long-term thing. We're talking years and decades of consistent effort. So it's all about lifestyle change through behavior modification, which means whatever the sort of fitness prescription is, it has to be palatable, has to be something that they want to do. So even if it's just walking. So just to give a tangible example, for me, people might assume that, oh, he's just a bro dude and he's just going to lift weights and drink protein shakes. And certainly that's a big part of my life, but it's like, yeah, but I also just walk in nature almost every day of the week for about an hour, which is absolutely medicine. I do a lot of yoga 2 to 3 days a week. I still run 5 miles here and there to keep my cardio strong. I think it's important to have a well-rounded fitness regimen that is appropriately intense for where you're at physiologically. Because certainly some people, if they're chronically ill, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue and severely depressed and all these chronic illness things, they're not going to be ready to jump into intense exercise or CrossFit or something extreme. So we have to, I always use the analogy of like a stick shift car, right? You're going to speed up, back off, switch, change gears, speed back up. You have to speed up to be able to change the gears one at a time. That's kind of how it is with fitness. You start slow, you ramp it up, you back off and recover, switch gears, start speeding up, get to that new speed, so on and so forth. It's just progressive overload and specific adaptation to impose demand, plotted over years and decades of life.
Makes sense. So we got to do it on a gradient, right? Depending on what your fitness level is, you might just be starting out. Maybe you're going to start off walking, and then start jogging, and then you're running, and then you're sprinting, right? And you're kind of building yourself up. So that makes sense. That means that no matter what fitness level you are, you can start somewhere. You got to start somewhere, which is nice, and that's encouraging. And of course, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? It's going to take time to get where we want to go. But certainly, emphasizing exercise, I think, is an important endeavor. The next thing that we talked about really was the environment and how toxic of an environment we lived in. You mentioned things like glyphosate, or you mentioned things like mold. Obviously, if you have mold, you're probably going to have bacteria, right? You're probably going to have toxins from mold and bacteria. So there's a whole host of things. We have the microplastics, the VOCs, the EMFs, right? You name it, right? There's a whole toxic world out there, and that world is typically our own homes. So I would love for you to explain a little bit about the relationship between our environment and our health. And of course, you've got courses and you're doing amazing things. You've got a textbook. So we're going to dive all into that.
Yeah, the environmental medicine, it has really become a big passion of mine in the past decade or so, because certainly with how I got into the whole mold illness thing and some of the struggles that I went through and some of my loved ones, the idea of, well, how is your literal environment impacting your health? Because with my more kind of metabolic and lifestyle based background, lifestyle as medicine always made a lot of sense to me. But then as I learned more about environmental medicine and the noxious effects of the heavy metals and the glyphosates and all the things, right? And so I really don't think we yet know how much this toxic soup is fully impacting us. The human data isn't as strong as we need to, especially to really demand policy reform, which is kind of what's going on in the political landscape right now. But I hope to see us, phase out glyphosate, glufosinate, and obviously a lot more awareness around sick building syndrome and biotoxin illness. But even like I just published a big blog with Vibrant Wellness on microplastics and nanoplastics and PFAS, the forever chemicals. And I mean, literally, there were like 80 citations that I put into that blog. So I've done a deep dive into the research of, we know a lot mechanistically of how all of these different pollutants, toxicants, metals, so on and so forth, are directly stimulating oxidative stress and inflammation that can obviously be contributing to the chronic disease epidemic. So kind of the question is, I don't know because we don't have the data, but if we could simply plot, like, out of all the chronic disease burden that we're facing, what percentage of it is really lifestyle and what percentage of it is environmental driven, right? We don't really know, but you can imagine too, even if you're living a very healthy lifestyle, you're eating really well, you're exercising well, you're managing your stress, you're practicing sleep hygiene, we still have all of these oxidative, inflammatory junk toxins that we're being exposed to, we're ingesting, breathing, drinking, so on and so forth. So we have a lot of work to do to clean it up and clean up the air.
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, statistically speaking, it's a pretty big problem. It's definitely an epidemic. The EPA suggests at least 50% of buildings have a history of water damage. We know water damage creates the problems, right, in our buildings that lead to VOCs and off-gassing of certain chemicals inside of our homes that lead to mold, that lead to bacteria, those biotoxins you mentioned. So if we have a pretty big statistic like that, 50%, right? That's, think about that. That's 1 in 2 homes. I mean, that's, if you walk out into your development right now, you're like, quite a few neighbors are impacted, right? So, what do we do? Where do we go? I think that's the bigger question. And I think that's, something that we're dealing with as a society. What else do we need to be thinking about in terms of our overall health and improving it?
Yeah, it's funny, the 50% statistic, I literally just cited that in my textbook that I'm writing right now, because I saw that one. But there's so many layers to it. And the thing is, for me, especially because I'm not a licensed practitioner, I'm not a dictator, I'm not prescriptive or anything. I look at it as my goal to educate and empower people to make their own informed decisions about their health. I'm here to present options and advocate for, well, if you want my professional opinion, here's what I think your priorities should be or what's going to move the needle the most. Because I'm all about, let's use all available interventions possible, but making sure it's bio-individualized to what resonates with them. Because if it resonates with them, it's palatable, they're more likely to do it, which is going to boost compliance, which will enhance clinical outcome, right? Because you can make all the recommendations or prescriptions in the world, but if there's no compliance and follow through, they're not going to get anywhere. Now, certainly, I think of kind of the what I call the holistic or functional intervention spectrum of environmental intervention, psychological, psycho-emotional intervention, kind of thinking psychotherapy and spiritual work, lifestyle intervention, and then, of course, all the different therapeutics, whether we're talking about nutraceuticals, botanicals, probiotics, peptides, psychedelics, pharmaceuticals. And I'm all about efficacy, point A to point B. I'm a very direct person because a lot of these people, they're so chronically ill, symptomatic, depressed, tired, fed up, burnout, confused, overwhelmed, that we just got to get them feeling better. So I'm a huge advocate of hormone replacement therapy when done well, and peptide therapy, because I think if we're just trying to move the needle very, very quickly on symptoms, because look at, cleaning up your environment, optimizing your lifestyle, working on your psychology, that stuff can take years and decades of practice and effort. And a lot of people are like, I need to feel better before I can do all that work. So that's where I think using certain therapeutics like the peptides or hormones with precision, we can dramatically get them feeling better. And now that you're feeling better and the lights are on and you have the energy, let's really start looking at, hey, how do we clean up the environment? How do we optimize the lifestyle? Because even think about, like, I have an air filter right here, a molecule underneath my desk. And it's like, even just investing in quality air filter, imagine the decreased toxic burden of every breath you take in your home, for a 24-hour period.
Yeah.
Multiply that over the course of a week or a year. So, high quality air filter, water filter, switching to more organic foods ideally, or just a more whole food diet in general. I mean, it can make a dramatic difference as time goes on.
Yeah, I actually love what you said, because I think there's a lot of people don't realize the work that goes into this, dealing with chronic illness. I mean, you literally are talking about like creating the perfect healthy home, right?
Yeah.
And typically, depending on your situation and what results show of your exact home, like that's going to require moving out and like dealing with that as a project, right? And if you're not in the right state of mind to deal with a project, it's going to be pretty difficult to go through. Unfortunately, it's one of those chicken before the egg type of scenarios where, when you're living inside the problem, it's really hard to really heal. But, I'm interested to hear more about some of these hormone therapies that you're doing, the peptide therapies you're doing, and what sort of results you're seeing from people. Like what sort of oomph is that giving people to be able to confront and tackle some of the bigger obstacles and hurdles that you're dealing with on this journey?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky thing, obviously, with this sort of the chronic disease crisis. If we're looking at it more from like a physiological mechanism perspective, it's an epidemic of increased oxidative stress and inflammation. And so then it's a matter of, well, what's contributing to more oxidative stress and inflammation? Well, enter all the toxins, the lifestyle habits, all these different etiological root cause factors that are contributing to all this oxidative stress and inflammation that drives chronic disease. And what's the weak link in the body where the problem really manifests? Is it diabetes? Is it Alzheimer's? Is it heart disease? Is it fatty liver? So on and so IBD, autoimmunity, the list goes on and on and on. And so certainly I would really say that most Americans have pretty wrecked hormones. And it's not so much that the hormone imbalances are the root cause, it's a side effect of root cause factors disturbing their hormones, right? I'm a little bit worried that I think our population is going to be like totally reliant on exogenous hormone replacement within the next 10 to 20 years based on how things are really going. I feel like in today's world, it's very difficult to have great, healthy, robust hormone levels completely naturally. But either way, I mean, I think it's great to embrace modern technology as we have it. And it's all about quality of life and longevity. So even you think about like, I don't have an exact number, but what percentage of Americans have low testosterone or high estrogen and, dysregulated cortisol, these things? Even just like that low testosterone though, depression and apathy and fatigue and low libido and chronic fatigue and can't recover. So even you just get men, women, doesn't really matter the gender, but getting them on an appropriate dose of the right hormone cocktail that is definitely just as much an art as a science. But it's one of the things that can move the needle the fastest with quality of life, symptoms, cognition, energy, all the things. So now they're able to do a little bit more of that extra work. And kind of the same thing with peptides and bioregulators. I think, peptides in many ways are the future of medicine. Obviously, the regulatory landscape is a little bit gray and weird and iffy right now. So it's not the easiest thing to get your hands on really high quality peptides. And I work with different providers and doctors that can facilitate proper HRT and peptides. But it is one of those things that we can support tissue regeneration and more work with the body's natural rhythms and neuroendocrine pathways with both HRT and peptides. Whether it's, we're trying to decrease inflammation or modulate the immune system or just get them, more libido and energy and recovery from their gym sessions. But I would just say, I think if people are trying to optimize their health, they're chronically ill, they don't know where to begin, I think properly done peptide and hormone replacement would be the fastest way to sort of reboot the system. But now, let me give a dark example though, because what we don't want to do, and this is happening right now with the Ozempic craze, is you have people that, okay, they're not thinking about their environment and how toxic it might be. Maybe they're not doing therapy and looking at their mindset or psychology. The lifestyle foundations are just not what they should be, right? They're eating processed food, they're living a sedentary lifestyle. I'll just go on Ozempic, right? And they're doing higher doses of Ozempic and wasting away and getting really catabolic and whatnot. But then you look at what they're still eating, and a lot of times they're still eating ultra processed food, right? And to me, there's no point in doing that. Why don't you just clean up your diet and see what kind of results you can get naturally? But the idea of using a drug that now you might be dependent on, but you're still fueling your body with ultra processed food, that's a very different thing than taking somebody that's exercising regularly, applying themselves in the kitchen and eating really well, and they're microdosing Ozempic, just minimum effective dose, just to boost the process, right? They're wildly different contexts, right? Sure. And context is everything.
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, I think, I've heard this from quite a few people, right? But that as Americans, our hormones are disrupted pretty severely. And is that, in your view, is that just because of the first things we mentioned, the sedentary lifestyle, not a lot of exercise, the toxins we're exposed to externally, or is there other factors at play as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's really all of it. I mean, from the more lifestyle perspective, whether it's like they're not consuming the nutrients they need to really have healthy hormones or healthy physiology in general, all the nutrient deficiencies, but then also as inflammation and oxidative stress are creeping up in the body, that does dysregulate a lot of our hormones. We know inflammation will increase the conversion of our androgens into estrogens. So that's a major part of why so many Americans have, more estrogen dominance, lower testosterone levels in general. So definitely the lifestyle component is huge, the processed food, the sedentary, but then also all the xenoestrogens and xenobiotics, or even, with mold. I was just writing that in the textbook of zearalenone, we know is a major estrogenic mycotoxin even. So, or even metalloestrogen. Some of the heavy metals have estrogen-like properties. So when you look at all the bisphenols and phthalates and toluenes and mycotoxins and metals, all of these xenobiotics and xenoestrogens that have estrogenic effects in the human body. So even like just now, I was looking at one of our new clients in the practice, helping out one of my practitioners on a case. And I'm looking at the hormone test results and the presentation where she's presenting with a lot of symptoms of estrogen dominance, endometriosis and heavy bleeding, very kind of estrogen dominant symptoms. But then you look at her hormone test and her hormones are tanked. She has like very little estrogen, very little. So what I was just saying to my practitioner is, well, it's very possible that maybe her hormones are shot, but she could have a lot of xenoestrogen exposure that's driving excess estrogen activity in the body, even though the hormones are shot. So I think the environmental contributor to the hormone imbalances is absolutely huge. And I'm pretty worried about it from like a fertility perspective as we move forward.
Yeah, no, we've seen a lot of that. I mean, we had Christina Perry who went through some infertility issues with some really severe mold issues in one of her homes. So no, we've seen it firsthand. Quick question for you. I want to switch gears over to nutrition now, briefly, because I think nutrition is one of those topics that it seems so easy, right? Like the food pyramid, all the things that we've learned about food. However, when you turn on your TV or you turn on your Instagram, right, you start to really get confused pretty quick. I've got people that are like, you got to eat nothing but meat. We've got people that are like, you need to eat nothing but plants. And then you've got people that are like, just eat sourdough bread, just make your own sourdough bread and eat nothing but sourdough bread and you're good to go. Right. So, I'm obviously being a little bit facetious here, but I think the reality of the situation is it's actually more confusing than it is clear. Because I think for a lot of people, certain things work for them better than others. I would love to just high level give us a school, take us to school a little bit on nutrition. Do we need to stay away from carbs entirely? Is there a carb threshold? Is there a type of carb? Do we eat nothing but meat? Do we eat nothing but plants? Enlighten us.
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, we all need to unplug from the head trash of the internet a little bit, and look, I'm guilty of it too. I have a big social media platform that does feed into my business. So I kind of have to be on there, but I get caught doom scrolling like way too much. I catch myself because my algorithm in my feed it's just trash. Like it's just a bunch of junk information. That's not even quality stuff half the time. And I catch myself, I'm like, what am I doing? Like put my phone down and go do something with my life. My point being there's the neurological addiction that are keeping people sucked into their phones and sucked into the never ending feed. And so they're just consuming so much information, but then not really implementing like any of it. Right. And we don't need to overcomplicate nutrition. My whole career, I'm going on like 16 years now. It blows my mind how much we overcomplicate nutrition. You drew a very powerful spectrum there with, you've got like the carnivore movement, just eat meats, and then, the vegan movement, just eat plants and all this. And I still don't understand the difference between like plant-based and vegan, and I don't really care, but, ultimately I like the old school. I used to say this back when I was like 18, just eat real food, right? And it's crazy. I've looked at a ton of research around ultra processed food, and it's just pure poison for the body. Like it's so bad. It drives IBD and chronic disease, diabetes, all these things. And we really don't need to overcomplicate it. And sure, people like to argue about is organic really better or not. and people just argue, right? And so it's like, are we even really trying to figure out like the optimal way of eating for humans, or are we just arguing because we like to argue, right? Because
Right.
the arguments about seed oils, you see why is everything so polarized? So with nutrition, I think it's really helpful to simplify it. And certainly nutrition shouldn't be prescriptive. If it's prescriptive, it's short term, people aren't going to stick to it. We want lasting behavior modification. We want healthy nutritional habits to just be baked into their lifestyle, and easy is earned, right? So there is something to be said about sort of that detox, of detoxing yourself from, kind of metaphysically speaking, from the ultra processed food, breaking the addiction to it, and just eating real food. Now, once people are just eating real food, we have to get them in tune with their biofeedback, their hunger, their energy, their cravings, their mood, get them in tune with their body. When you can learn how to correlate how you feel and your biofeedback with what you're putting into your body, that's where the magic happens. Because once you become aware, you're not going to become unaware again. You can't unsee it. You just become even more aware and even more in tune. And that has a snowball effect. So once you really start paying attention to, but how does this meal make me feel, right? Like if you're fueling your body properly, should be feeling pretty good, right? And certainly you can get more advanced as you master the basics. Like step one is just eat real food and nothing but, like minimal to no processed food, right? And effectively hydrating. Then you can get a little bit more advanced if you want to dabble with like macros, or, removing certain things, identifying food intolerances or sensitivities, but that's all a lot more advanced. But ultimately just keeping it very, very simple with whole foods and balanced meals, eat the rainbow, eat plenty of protein. I look at blood work on people every single day, and I can see it in their blood work. When they're not eating enough protein, they're obviously eating too many carbohydrates. The blood never lies too. So that's where I think using lab testing to guide the nutritional habits and exercise can be really empowering.
Good. Well, let's talk about that. So you're seeing a lot of blood work, and you're able to obviously decipher that and really understand what people's diets are like from there, and then give them the tools they need to change that around. So what is the average person eating? What are you seeing in this blood work? What do we need to do to turn things around?
Yeah, it's wild. And I was saying this on the podcast yesterday of, if I had to pick between nutrition and fitness in sort of arbitrary asinine hypothetical, I would actually pick fitness over nutrition. And this is partially, over many, many years of working with clients for the past like 15, 16 years, I really have seen, even based on blood work. Now, this is anecdotal, but either way, very valuable, where from like a blood work perspective, is their blood work getting better? Yes or no? The people that are applying themselves in the gym tend to get better results than the people that are not really applying themselves in the gym, but they eat a little bit better. I think you can kind of get away with a little bit more if you're exercising well, but I'm certainly advocating we want to optimize both as much as possible.
Right.
But even like whether it's basic blood chemistry or more advanced and more exotic markers that we can use to decipher things like SIRS and mold illness, but even just basic metabolic parameters, you see it over and over. The people that are hyperglycemic, high insulin, high lipids, high metabolic enzymes and liver enzymes, elevated inflammation, so on and so forth. And you can really see too when somebody's just metabolically compromised or are they underfed, but you can get a little bit more micro if you get advanced with lab analysis, where it's like, oh, well, I can see based on their blood urea nitrogen that they're obviously not eating enough protein. Their low creatinine tells me that they're probably not exercising. They have low lean mass. Meanwhile, their HbA1c is at like 6.5 and their C-peptide as a marker of insulin is at, like 10 or 15 or something. But one of my favorite, just to give the audience like a good clinical pearl, something that I recommend everybody measure and track in their annual blood work, is the adiponectin to leptin ratio. These are two different hormones made by fat cells. Adiponectin is more pro-metabolic health and anti-inflammatory. Leptin at increasing concentrations is more kind of anti-metabolic health and pro-inflammatory. And so looking at the ratio of adiponectin to leptin is, in my opinion, the single most valuable blood biomarker of metabolic health and status. So especially people that are like trying to lose weight, whether they're doing Ozempic or natural, I don't care. It's their life. but using the blood work to make sure that you're doing it well and doing it right. If the adiponectin is going up and the leptin is going down and that ratio is improving, you're doing something right and you're moving in the right direction. Keep doing what you're doing. But if leptin is going up and up and up and adiponectin is going down, 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 they're metabolically compromised. Something's got to change. So obviously there's a lot of cool biomarkers out there, but that one is probably the most sensitive indicator of what your metabolism is doing.
Oh, it's good to know. Great insight. Yeah, since you brought up Ozempic, we've seen some actual contention lately on Ozempic, right? So you have the camp of, it's really bad for you, you shouldn't do it. Then you've got some interesting studies coming out that are actually putting it in a more positive light. What's your take? Good, bad, and is it like anything else where, it becomes bad if you build a dependency on it, or you just give us the landscape from your view?
Yeah, I'm such a nuance guy. I'm the most non-polarizing, like that guy from the Oppenheimer movie. Now I don't know how the real life Oppenheimer. I don't know how he was as a dude. Never met him, but that movie, I was like, that's kind of how I am. People like to choose a political party or be very polarizing, choose a stance, and kind of fight over it. I'm always like, no, the truth is somewhere in the middle, and I think the most logical, reasonable, intelligent, critical thinkers are probably going to be somewhere in the middle. They can acknowledge that, duality is hard for people. So the human ego would much rather just blindly choose a side and fight for it to protect their fragile ego. And it's like, no, if we can kind of tame that and actually use our brains and logic and be reasonable and practice emotional regulation, be mature, we should be able to hold space for duality, which says two opposing antithetical viewpoints could coexist simultaneously. Two things that might seem opposite or antagonistic, they could both be true at the same time. That's duality, right? My experience might be totally different from your experience, but it's two sides of the same coin. And it seems kind of asinine to argue about subjective perception. So when we look at Ozempic, I never would have predicted the GLP-1 drugs would have gotten to be this big of a worldwide sensation. They're not even really that new. They've been around for a while. But they've really hit this point of critical mass and everybody's kind of jumping on them. And so it's just really trending heavily. I just look at it as a therapeutic avenue. Now, certainly, whether somebody wants to try to microdose it to optimize their aesthetics and their metabolic health a little bit. My friend, Dr. Tina, is big on the microdosing, or James Laval, who's a friend, they're big advocates of minimum effective dose and microdosing it. And I think minimum effective dose is always a good way to go. Less is more most of the time, which, yes, is technically a little bit off label, but, I think it's all about efficacy and being intelligent. Now, what I worry about with Ozempic a little bit is the long-term effects and the dependency and the reliance. For example, if I've got, let's use my friend Tina. She works out regularly. She eats well. She microdoses Ozempic to give her a little extra boost. Good for her. And it helps her a lot. She has a history of autoimmunity and all these inflammatory problems. So it's just a tool that she's using to enhance her outcomes from the efforts that she's putting in. What I worry about is like I alluded to before, the Americans that they're not putting in the work with exercise, lifestyle, nutrition, all these things, and hoping that standard or higher dosing of Ozempic is just going to do it for them. I worry about that. And I do worry about some of these people that are overdoing it. Will they be able to successfully ever get off of it? Are they going to be dependent on it for life? And then what? What are the ramifications of that, clinically speaking? But it has a lot of therapeutic potential, even for Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative disorders, let alone all the metabolic disorders. So we should embrace it, but we need to use it efficaciously and responsibly, right? But yeah, it's a wild thing to see the whole craze of it all. Totally.
So now that we've covered a great gambit of different topics, I want to talk about your course and the textbook and everything you're doing within the mold community, creating awareness around the toxic effects of molds and really helping people overcome them, because I think that's really important. And definitely, certainly there'll be listeners that are excited to hear about it. So please plug away and also tell us where we can find you and all the fantastic things.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I appreciate it. It's an exciting year. I've got a really, really good team behind me now that can help make all the magic happen. So it's been great to be able to actually focus on trying to do my best work. So we've been, this is like my fourth rendition of the same mold course that I made back in like 2018, 2019. But, I always am trying to make it better and better. So we're about to launch our brand new Better Than Ever Mastering Mold Illness course. So very advanced functional medicine for mold illness for practitioners. But we do have a free mold guide that I'll make sure we include the link on, as well as then the full course that comes with an accompanying textbook that I'm writing right now. But I'm excited to get this course out because I've got a lot of practitioners, students that I think it'll really help them up level their mold literacy. And that's how we do it, right? We have to learn what works, what doesn't work. How do we optimize the clinical practice? We got to spread that information. So for me, that's why I'm so passionate about being a clinical educator, is I can only work with so many clients at a time. So I love putting out tons of free content on social media and the podcast and all of that, but also training the next generation of practitioners, because we need a lot more effective practitioners that are mold literate and understand the complexities of chronic illness and know how to really meet their clients or patients where they're at and guide them through recovery with objectivity and using the proper lab testing to identify the problem, fix the problem, keep people living well and having the quality of life they deserve.
That's awesome. So where can people find this course?
Absolutely. So we're working on the website, but metabolicsolutionsllc.com. Instagram is probably the easiest path. The Holistic Savage is the Instagram, because that's where I put out all the free content and the link tree where people can get anything they need, or they can always email info@metabolicsolutionsllc.com, but we're not too hard to find.
Good. Now, this is going to feel like you're repeating yourself, but I want to make sure. Where can people find you? Where can they connect with you? Where can they find and work with you and all the amazing things to connect with you and your team?
Absolutely. We're on basically all platforms, but Instagram is the main one. So the Holistic Savage would be the best way to just follow my work, see what I'm up to. You can always subscribe to our newsletter through the website, metabolicsolutionsllc.com. You can just search my name on LinkedIn, Facebook. I'll pop up kind of all over the place, but those are the main channels.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really want to appreciate you and acknowledge you for taking the time out of your busy day. I know you're working tirelessly on this course and the textbook, but it really means a lot, to share your knowledge, to talk about all the different, the gamut of things that we actually need to be in control of so we don't get into that victim mentality. So any other parting words you have for us before we go?
Well, I just appreciate you too, Michael. I mean, we had a great conversation on my podcast. This was a great conversation. I love that we did the mold stuff, but we tied it with lifestyle and really so much more, mindset and the responsible use of emergent therapeutics. So I thought it was a really fun conversation. I have a lot of respect for the work you're doing. I believe the work I'm doing is important. So I'm excited to see where it goes. And I hope the audience enjoys all of it.
No, it totally is. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for the awareness you're creating around this important subject. And thanks for bringing forth the solutions.
Absolutely, brother. Appreciate you.
Talk soon.